The night sky over Guadalcanal was dark, save for the distant flashes of gunfire and the echoes of explosions, as Admiral Norman Scott prepared to lead his fleet into battle. It was the 11th of October, 1942, and the fate of the Pacific War hung in the balance. American ships, having suffered a humiliating defeat just weeks earlier at the Battle of Savo Island, now stood poised to strike back against the Imperial Japanese Navy. Scott's ships were lined up, ready for what would be known as the Battle of Cape Esperance. The Japanese were bringing reinforcements to Guadalcanal, a crucial island in the Solomon Islands, but Scott's task force was determined to stop them. Aboard the USS San Francisco, Scott awaited the crucial report from the Kingfisher scout plane, which had already spotted the enemy. At 8 a.m., the Japanese reinforcements, heavy cruisers, and destroyers were identified, but Scott knew the battle would not be easy. The battle would soon unfold under the cloak of darkness, where confusion and chaos would reign. This was no ordinary night engagement. This was the moment to reclaim the lost pride of the U.S. Navy, to avenge the losses from the disastrous defeat at Savo Island. The American fleet, battle-tested and determined, was about to face off against the Japanese Navy's finest, with lives and victory at stake. As Scott's ships prepared for their final move, the tension in the air was palpable. The night sky would soon erupt into a vicious contest of firepower and strategy, where only one side would emerge victorious. Scott's meticulous training of his crews would soon be put to the test in one of the most critical naval engagements of the war. The darkened waters of the Pacific were about to witness a pivotal moment, where strategy, courage, and the will to win would define the outcome. The quiet hum of the engines was broken by the sudden call to action at that moment. The battle was no longer a distant possibility, but a rapidly approaching reality. The American Navy was about to test its resolve under the darkest of circumstances, with night combat that would require every ounce of skill and nerve. This was more than a clash of ships. It was a clash of ideals, a struggle for control of the Pacific, and a battle to preserve the honor of the American forces. Scott's task force was not just fighting the Japanese Navy. They were fighting to show that the U.S. Navy could emerge victorious, even in the most difficult of circumstances. But the true test would come not from technology or tactics alone. It would come from the hearts of the sailors who had something to prove to their nation, their comrades, and themselves. The American ships stood ready. The night was theirs for the taking. The clock ticked down toward the critical hour as Admiral Scott's fleet moved into position. The night was silent except for the occasional crackle of communication from the ships and the distant hum of engines. The tension was palpable, as each man knew that the fate of the Pacific depended on the battle about to unfold. With Guadalcanal hanging in the balance, Scott's mission was clear: stop the Japanese reinforcements at all costs. As the American ships lined up in their formation, Scott's mind raced through the strategy that had been carefully planned in the days leading up to this moment. He knew that the Japanese were bringing heavy cruisers, destroyers, and reinforcements to Guadalcanal, but they had underestimated the resolve of the American Navy. Scott had spent weeks preparing his crews for this night battle, drilling them in the tactics that would give them an edge in the darkness. His fleet had undergone rigorous training, and Scott himself had taken every step to ensure that his sailors would be ready. The American fleet, although outnumbered, was equipped with advanced radar systems, which would be crucial in the dark, moonless night. The Japanese, however, relied on visual sightings and had no such advantage. It was a gamble, but Scott believed in the training and capabilities of his crew. The plan was to make the first strike, using the element of surprise and the confusion of the night to outmaneuver the Japanese. Meanwhile, on the Japanese side, Rear Admiral Takagi Jojima led the reinforcement group. They were confident in their approach, unaware of the American fleet lying in wait. The Japanese task force was moving through the waters of the Solomon Islands, bringing supplies and reinforcements to the troops on Guadalcanal. It was a critical mission, one that would decide the future of the island. Scott's task force was ready. The 4 cruisers, San Francisco, Boise, Salt Lake City, and Helena, were positioned strategically, with the destroyers Fahrenholt, Duncan, and Laffey leading the way. The cruiser San Francisco, which would play a central role in the attack, had already launched its Kingfisher scout plane to locate the enemy. By 8 a.m., The plane had reported sighting the Japanese ships. The American fleet was prepared to intercept, but the dark waters and the uncertainty of the situation made the engagement more dangerous. At 11:32 p.m., Admiral Scott gave the order to turn 180 degrees, positioning his fleet to intercept the enemy. The movement, though calculated, resulted in confusion. The leading destroyers, due to the darkness and lack of visibility, had lost their bearings and were slightly off course. This error would have major consequences in the coming moments. The American fleet was ready, but the failure to maintain precise formation created a sense of uncertainty. Scott, still unsure of the full enemy strength, had to rely on conflicting reports from his ships. The Helena, equipped with advanced radar, had detected the Japanese forces, but the San Francisco was unable to confirm the sighting. Meanwhile, the Boise, also equipped with radar, reported spotting several unidentified targets. Scott's decision-making was becoming more difficult as the uncertainty grew, but he knew that waiting was not an option. The battle was inevitable. The stage was set for the first shots of the Battle of Cape Esperance. As the American fleet closed in on the Japanese, the air was thick with anticipation. The question remained, who would have the upper hand in this night engagement? The American fleet was about to enter the fray, but the outcome was far from certain. The darkness of the night was suddenly shattered by the deafening roar of guns as Admiral Scott's fleet fired the first shots. The American ships had caught the Japanese by surprise, launching a barrage of firepower that lit up the night sky. The heavy cruiser Aoba, part of the Japanese reinforcement group, was the first to feel the wrath of American fire. The shells from the American cruisers slammed into the Aoba, causing explosions to rip through the ship, sending smoke billowing into the air. But the Japanese were not unprepared. They fought back with ferocity. The battle, despite the initial surprise, quickly devolved into chaos. The ships of both sides engaged in a deadly dance, maneuvering through the darkness while trying to avoid each other's fire. Scott's fleet, relying on its superior radar systems, fired at the Japanese with pinpoint accuracy. But despite the overwhelming firepower of the Americans, the Japanese remained resilient, their ships returning fire with deadly precision. As the American cruisers poured rounds into the Japanese ships, the battle shifted into a brutal, close-quarters engagement. The American destroyers, which had taken the brunt of the Japanese retaliation, found themselves in a desperate struggle. The USS Duncan, one of the first destroyers to charge at the enemy, was severely damaged by both Japanese and American fire. The ship was struck by shells, sending massive explosions through its hull. The fire spread quickly, forcing the crew to abandon ship. But despite the devastation, the sailors of the Duncan fought valiantly, trying to keep the ship afloat. Lieutenant Commander Edmund B. Taylor, the captain of the Duncan, stood at the helm, watching as his ship was torn apart by enemy fire. As the ship listed to one side, he gave the order to abandon ship, knowing that there was no saving it. The sailors scrambled to life rafts, drifting away from the burning wreckage of the Duncan. It was a bittersweet moment, though, and they had survived. They had lost a vital piece of their fleet. Meanwhile, aboard the USS Boise, the battle was just as intense. Captain Edward Moran watched as the ship was rocked by the enemy's return fire. Shells tore into the Boise's hull, causing fires to erupt, but the crew of the Boise refused to give up. The damage control teams worked tirelessly to put out the flames, and the gunners kept firing, taking down Japanese ships one by one. Despite the devastating blows, the Boise pressed on, refusing to back down. The sacrifices made that night were not just about ships or tactics. They were about the men who fought and died to ensure victory. As the American ships continued to exchange fire with the Japanese, the outcome of the battle remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: the American fleet was willing to pay any price to stop the Japanese from reinforcing Guadalcanal. The sound of the guns, the smoke, and the explosions filled the air. The battle had become a test of endurance, and both sides were determined to emerge victorious. As Admiral Scott watched from the bridge of the San Francisco, he knew that this battle would define the course of the war. The American Navy had something to prove, and they would sacrifice everything to make sure their efforts were not in vain. The battle raged on through the night, the sound of gunfire and explosions echoing across the waters of the Solomon Islands. But as the hours passed, the tide began to shift in favor of the American fleet. The Japanese, despite their fierce resistance, were beginning to falter. The heavy cruiser, Aoba, badly damaged and on fire, withdrew from the battle, its ability to fight severely compromised. The American ships, though battered and scarred, pressed on. At 12:06 a.m., Scott's fleet had made significant progress. The enemy was retreating, and the American task force had successfully inflicted substantial damage on the Japanese forces. However, the cost was high. The USS Duncan was lost, its crew scattered across the sea, and the USS Boise, though still afloat, had suffered severe damage. Yet, the crew of the Boise remained resolute, their firepower still very much a threat to the Japanese. The American sailors, though weary, had managed to neutralize a significant portion of the Japanese fleet. The Japanese destroyer Fubuki, having taken multiple hits from American fire, was the first to sink. Its destruction marked the first major loss for the Japanese, and the victory came as a hard-fought symbol of the Americans' determination to reclaim control of the Pacific. But the battle was not over yet. The USS Boise had been hit several times, and fires continued to rage on the ship. But through sheer determination and the relentless efforts of the crew, the fires were finally brought under control. Despite losing 107 men and suffering extensive damage, the Boise was able to rejoin Admiral Scott's column at 3:05 a.m., a testament to the strength and resilience of the American sailors. The crew, exhausted but proud, had overcome what seemed like insurmountable odds. As the battle began to wind down, the Japanese were forced to retreat. The remaining ships, including the heavily damaged Aoba, were unable to maintain their position. The American fleet, though, scarred by the battle, had delivered a decisive blow. They had stopped the Japanese reinforcements, and in doing so, had disrupted Japan's operations in the Solomon Islands. But the victory came at a steep price. The Japanese losses were significant. 3 destroyers and a heavy cruiser had been sunk, and hundreds of Japanese sailors had perished in the battle. But despite these losses, the Japanese High Command initially refused to acknowledge the scale of their defeat. It wasn't until the American airstrikes the following morning, which further crippled their remaining ships, that Japan was forced to accept the consequences of their failed mission. For the American sailors, the battle had been both a victory and a tragedy. The cost in lives and ships was high, but they had managed to turn the tide in the Pacific War. The Battle of Cape Esperance was a pivotal moment, a victory that proved the American Navy's ability to fight back, even against overwhelming odds. Yet, as the sailors reflected on their success, the losses were felt deeply. Scott's task force had suffered. But in the end, the Americans had proven their resolve. The battle had shown that despite the odds, victory was possible. As the fleet withdrew to regroup, the sailors knew that they had played a crucial role in the larger war effort. The victory at Cape Esperance was a testament to their bravery and their commitment to the cause, no matter the cost. The Battle of Cape Esperance, though not the largest or most talked about battle of the Pacific War, became a pivotal moment in the broader struggle for control of the Solomon Islands. It was a victory that came at a steep price, yet it marked the beginning of a shift in momentum for the United States Navy in the Pacific. Despite the loss of the USS Duncan and the heavy damage to the USS Boise, the battle proved that the U.S. Navy was capable of striking back at the heart of the Japanese fleet. The aftermath of the battle saw the Japanese Navy reeling from the losses. 3 of their destroyers and a heavy cruiser were sunk, and many of their experienced sailors and officers were lost. It was a severe blow to their plans to reinforce Guadalcanal, a mission that was crucial to the Japanese war effort. Although the Japanese would continue to contest the islands, the battle had shown that their fleet was not invincible. The American Navy had dealt a blow that would have lasting consequences. For Admiral Norman Scott, the victory was bittersweet. He had led his men through the chaos of night combat, overcoming confusion, friendly fire, and the challenges of operating in the dark. His leadership had been crucial in turning the tide, but the price of victory weighed heavily on him. He knew that the battle was just one chapter in the larger war, but it had shown the resilience of the U.S. Navy and the courage of the sailors who fought that night. Sadly, Scott would not live to see the full fruits of his success. A month later, he was killed in action during the Battle of Guadalcanal, but his legacy lived on in the sailors he led. The sailors of the American fleet, particularly those aboard the USS Boise and USS Duncan, became symbols of resilience and determination. Despite the losses, the American fleet had proven that it could fight back against the Japanese. The victory at Cape Esperance was a crucial moment that would help shape the future of the war in the Pacific. The American Navy had learned valuable lessons, not just in night combat, but in the importance of unity, preparation, and leadership. As the war continued, the United States would press forward with increasing strength, and the Japanese, though formidable, would find it harder to maintain their hold on the Pacific. The Battle of Cape Esperance would go down in history as a victory that marked the beginning of the end for Japanese naval dominance. It was a testament to the sacrifices made by countless sailors who gave their lives in the pursuit of freedom. In the years after the war, the lessons of the Battle of Cape Esperance would be remembered as a crucial turning point in the Pacific campaign. Veterans of the battle would reflect on their experiences with pride, knowing that they had played a key role in shaping the outcome of the war. For them, the battle was more than just a military engagement. It was a moment of personal sacrifice and collective achievement that would echo through history. The legacy of those who fought at Cape Esperance reminds us of the true cost of war. It is not just the ships that are lost or the battles that are won, but the lives of those who served and sacrificed for a cause greater than themselves. Their courage and perseverance would ensure that the victory achieved at Cape Esperance would not be forgotten, and it would inspire future generations to honor their legacy.